Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome to the Church Communications Group. It is Webinar Wednesday. My name is Abby. I'm so excited to be here with you today, and I'm joined by my new friends Todd and Matt from Chemistry Staffing. Hey guys, how are you?
Fantastic.
Doing great.
Awesome. So glad to have you guys with us. So today we're going to be talking about online ministry and the potential that it has to impact people. As we all know, the pandemic has forced us to recognize how valuable online communication is, but as it's becoming the new normal, it can kind of still feel a little bit overwhelming to a lot of people. But before we dig into that, I want to get to know you guys. I want to hear about you and Chemistry Staffing and what your roles are there. So Todd, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, I'm Todd, and Matt is here as well. We're both the two and only co-founders here at Chemistry Staffing. And we help churches come alongside churches and candidates and really help them to try and find healthy long-term fits. So what happened with us, just as kind of an introduction as far as what we're going to talk about today, and then Matt can introduce himself a little bit more too, is when the pandemic happened, you know, everything kind of came to a screeching halt, if you can remember back in March 2020. All churches had to some churches had a good online presence. Others didn't have any, but they learned how to do it in about 8 hours. So that's really kind of when we kind of took a second look at, you know, the churches that we're working with. They're all struggling right now, not so much with staffing, but how to do their online ministry. So that's really kind of what prompted us to kind of get involved in this space as well and try and help churches with their communication strategy when it comes to online churches. So that's enough about me. Matt, what would you like to add about Matt?
About Matt, I can go on all day.
All day, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Matt. I'm the other co-founder at Chemistry, and for those of you that care, I currently live in Orlando, Florida, which means it is 79 degrees out. And once we wrap this up, my 2.5-year-old Greyhound and I are going to go out and play in the no snow. So you are welcome, and you can repent for those thoughts that you are sending my way right now if you are in the snow belt. So that's probably not what you were hoping for, Abby, but that's what you get. So,
hey, well, we love to hear that. I'm not too far, just a little above you. I'm in Alabama, and it's not quite that warm here, but it's definitely not snowing, and I'm definitely grateful about that. So, yeah. Well, awesome. I'm so excited to be with you guys today and just to talk a little bit about online ministry. That's obviously what we love to talk about around here. Yeah. So as we kind of get started, you guys have a formula. You've kind of coined a formula for online ministry, and I want to hear about that. And as we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce that to our listeners or our watchers. So you say that you have 5 strategies for online ministry, 4 positions that need to be filled, 3 key data points that churches need to gather. There's 2 most important engagement for online attenders, and 1 goal for your church's online efforts. So I would love if you could kind of just walk us through each of those, because those are very distinct and very specific. And I'm already very intrigued. That's a very interesting way to look at it. And I'm very excited to hear about each of those specific points.
Yeah. And I think formula is a strong word. So if you know us, you know, we're not like super structured, and this isn't one of those things where if you do all these things, boom, you know, millions of people are going to be coming to Jesus. Right. I mean, that very well could happen, and I hope it does, but we're not necessarily that structured. But what we did. And just so people know, I mean, if you're coming to this thing with like ready to get a list of all the technology stuff that you need to go ask your executive pastor if you can buy, you're going to be deeply disappointed. we talk a lot more about some of the big picture things about this. And then, we can have conversations about how to implement that in your church. But what we found is coming out of, the first phase of the apocalypse, one of the things that churches are trying to figure out is how do we do this thing for the long term? Because, a lot of it has been, 2 years of just let's put our head down, let's try not to die, and let's keep doing this. And so what we've really come down to is, really for us, it starts with, what are you trying to do and why are you trying to do it? And so as Todd and I kind of worked through this, we came to the conclusion there's really 5 strategies of what different churches are trying to do online. And this is the caveat. It's like every strategy is good. Every strategy is fine. No strategy is better than others. And, all that kind of nonsense that we have to say. But we're pretty convinced that there's 5. And so for us, the 5 are these. There is an old normal. Okay. There's what we call simulcast. There's a building feeder strategy. There's a campus launcher strategy, and there's a digital disciple strategy. And so I'll unpack those really quick. Okay. Here's the old normal. And this may not be surprising. The old normal are churches that are waiting for everything to go back to the way that they were in January of 2020. Okay. Or June of 2019. You pick your date. Okay. So these are churches that really, they're not necessarily all that excited about online ministry. Everything's got to be in person, because that's how Jesus did it and all that kind of stuff. In person, weekly attendance in the building is the most important thing. And they may record sermons for a podcast or something like that. But it's just, the idea is, well, yeah, we'll do that because people might want to hear our pastor's sermons later in the week because they were so good the first time. So that's kind of that's that first strategy. Okay. So second strategy, and if I talk too fast, I'm from the Northeast. So if I talk too fast, just tell me to slow down. Second strategy is kind of the simulcast, right? The idea for this is still the big idea is we want as many butts in seats in the main building as we possibly can. But we also understand that some people may not be showing up in the building because they're sick, because they're on vacation, because of whatever reason, right? And for those people, for our insiders, right? For our insiders, we're going to provide this alternative service so that, when they're at the beach, they can all gather around and they can watch, or whatever, right? So, and some churches, when we went online completely, everything became this way. But as they scale back and churches have opened up again, a lot of what churches are doing is deciding whether this is an insider focused option or an outsider focused option. And the insider, this is kind of that simulcast deal. So far, so good?
Yeah, doing great.
Cool. Okay. Building feeder. So for this, this is where you start to kind of think about online ministry as an outsider focused type of a deal. Here, the goal is to have as many people, in person eventually in an official location. And I use official location, with intent. But the idea is, we're going to start to create and craft an online experience that's going to be different intentionally from what our Sunday morning in-person experience is, because we understand that this is in some ways, this is the front door for people that are checking out our church, that this is a potential for us to be able to reach into communities that we've never been able to reach before. And so with that, that's when we start to up our production value. That's when we start to have designated online hosts. That's when, we begin to create a service that's special and a little bit different. And so this is where, we look at the building feeder approach as, the online service really is designed to convert online observers to attend in person at an official location. So far, so good.
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody's run off screaming heretic or anything. Well, we don't know. So fourth is the campus launcher. Okay. This, again, outsider focused. And we look at this and we use campus launcher loosely. Some people might get really caught up in that, and maybe one of y'all can suggest a better title. That'd be great. But here's the deal. This is the idea that it's an outsider focused type of a deal. And what we're looking to do is gather people together somewhere, whether it's an official location or not. And so this is where churches you might have a church in Pittsburgh that all of a sudden has this small little microsite campus of people down in Orlando because they hate the snow and they've got another house and they're inviting their friends to come in and take part in that service. And so there may or may not, there may or may not ever be some of those people showing up in an official location, but that's okay. And what these types of churches are doing is they're creating content, they're creating resources to allow to allow these types of gatherings to be healthy and thrive. And so they're supporting the people that are there with resources, content. They're helping them make it so that that experience can be really good as they gather people together. The idea is still to bring people together, but all of a sudden the metric isn't, what's our in person. It's now how many people are gathering there and how can we resource them? Mm-hmm. Subtle distinction, but I think it's a significant distinction. So make sense?
Yeah,
good?
Definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. The last one is this. It's the digital disciple. And this is, people are still figuring this out. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty excited about what the potential looks like for this. But this is the one that, people are going to be figuring this out for quite some time. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be arguing about whether it's church or not. But basically what this is this is a church that's going to say church can happen 100% virtually. Church can happen wherever that person is and has a screen in their hand, right? And they're going to create resources that resource anybody with a phone, anybody with a computer, anybody that's got the ability to kind of plug your pods in and be able to participate in a service. And so as we look at, Metaverse, as we look at, things coming down the pipe, there's some really intriguing opportunities here. But this is the space that, quite frankly, I'm too old to really know how to lean into this one super well. And Todd really is too old, but that's another conversation for another point.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome. But I think it's still early for that, and I think there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of shifts and things that go on in there. And so we can talk a little bit about what some of that might look like, but frankly, I don't know that anybody really knows what that's going to look like, and I don't know that we will for the next few years because people are still throwing things up against the wall to see what happens. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, and I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of people are still figuring out the first few that you mentioned. And so this whole new iteration of Metaverse and completely online church, there is a ton of debate about that, of whether that's real church or not. And we talk about that a lot here. So that is very interesting. But I do agree. I think it will be a little while before anything actually takes shape there. But it's very interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
So moving on to the positions, how many people do you really think you need to run an online ministry? Does it take an entire team like it would a real, like a traditional church? What's the thought there?
So are you ready for the consultant answer?
Yeah. Give me that.
It depends.
Well, yeah, of course.
You are welcome. So that was worth all the effort right there. I know.
Yes. Completely worth it.
So here's what we look at. And we think that there's 4 roles that need to be filled.
Okay. Yeah.
They can be filled by 4 people. They can be filled by 2 people. They can be filled by 1 person. A lot of it just depends on the context of your church. Okay?
They can be paid. They can be volunteer.
Exactly. Exactly. It's what strategy is your church leaning into? What is your church context, and what does that make sense? So Todd, you want to run through the positions, or do you want me to do that, or?
Why don't you do that, Matt? And then I want to circle back around even with the first section that we just did and kind of talk maybe more specifically to comms people and how this relates. Because this is we talk to a lot of communications staff and communications people, and this is a really exciting and yet sometimes frustrating type of thing. So if we go through the roles, then I can kind of come back and kind of put that through the comms filter and go from there.
Perfect. That sounds great.
Cool. So 4 roles. Okay. Online campus pastor, digital discipleship director, communications / social media director. And don't at me. Online service producer. Okay. Those are the 4 roles that we look for. And just real quick rundown on what those roles look like. And we've got some resources we'll talk about later that you guys can pull this out. So online campus pastor really is the champion of the online strategy. This is the person that needs to own this, right? So buck stops there. Most likely the face of the place, most likely the online host is the person that's developing out volunteer teams, running vision, buck stops with. So pretty straightforward. Digital discipleship director. This role is the person that is moving people from being digital consumers into true engagement. Okay. Turn clicks and views into discipleship opportunities, that kind of thing. This is the person whose role is leverage the available technology to get people to engage. And we'll talk about the 3 key data points here shortly that they're going after, and then some of the engagements that we need to get people connected in. Communication / social media director. In a lot of ways, this is a marketing role. In a lot of ways, this is the person who their sole passion is to take what the church is doing online, get it out to everybody so that people understand what's happening, get connected, and are able to begin the engagement process. Works pretty tightly with your digital discipleship person. And that's, in order to kind of leverage all the different channels they got. Online service producer, this is pretty straightforward. This is the person that, gets all the tech stuff, makes it happen. Okay. It's real straightforward. It's the person that makes sure that you can actually see, what's going on the screen, make sure that the audio doesn't suck, and is different from the house feed. Oh, can I say that? Sorry. But, ultimately responsible for the final product and making it all go. So, again, can be one person, probably not. Can be, maybe if it's the old normal church, yeah, you can be one person and do all that. And typically they're like, somebody's nephew. But as your church gets more serious about being others focused and gets more intentional about making this something that is well done and well produced, you're probably getting a little bit more, a larger of a team. It just really depends on your context and all that kind of stuff. Todd, what were you going to drill down into on this?
Well, from a communication staff person standpoint, so every church is different, right? So every communications person's role is different, and the place and the structure is different. So what we found going into COVID is that very few churches had a real cohesive online strategy, right? And when COVID hit, they were kind of forced to come up with something. And that's what a lot of churches did. They came up with something. They just kind of winged it because this is kind of uncharted territory for a lot of churches. Matt mentioned that we're going to, at the end of if you stick around to the end, kudos to you, but we'll give you a link to where you can actually download a copy of a pretty substantial PDF that lists all 5 of these models, all 4 of the positions. And that can really help you and your church if you're kind of just still in that we don't know where we're at or where we're going. This document will kind of help you and your leadership kind of determine future steps and which one of those. The feedback that we got for the last couple of years since we put this out is that not that this is rocket science by any means, but a lot of churches, this gave a lot of clarity when they could see kind of 5 different options and say, yeah, we're kind of right here, but we'd like to be over here. So we'll give you that resource a little bit later. But one area of frustration that we've heard from communications people sometimes is that it could be that you don't have, as a communications person, you don't have enough input, or you don't feel like you've got enough input into what those decisions are, right? Because those are fairly, particularly the higher you go from the first all the way up to the digital discipleship strategy. Those are really kind of directional and visionary type of moves that a lot of times, well, I'll just say it this way. If your senior pastor and your senior leadership don't buy into the model that you as a communication persons buy into, there can be some of this. And we've seen some of this. We'll have some communications people that really get excited and they're like, we need to be this strategy. But maybe the senior leadership is, no, we're waiting for, they would never say it like this, but we're waiting for things to get more back to normal. In person is the way to go. We got to get everybody back in the building as soon as we can. And as soon as we get all that, then we're going to go back to what we had before, maybe a simulcast or something like that. And the communications person might be like, this is such a huge opportunity. Why are we missing it? So those are areas that you just kind of have to know your structure, know your church, know your leadership, because they can be areas, if you don't have the opportunity to speak into some of those directional decisions, it can be really kind of tough for you to kind of have to implement, particularly if you're excited about it. and you don't see that there's a lot of strategy or vision there, it's going to be really kind of frustrating. So one recommendation, then we'll continue on, but one recommendation I would have, if you kind of find yourself in that role, that you can speak into it, but you're not the one that's kind of driving that, is definitely download that PDF and make some copies and give it to, the senior pastor or someone else. It's a very non-threatening way to say, hey, I've been thinking about this. I read this online. This gives us some really good parameters about what our future online ministry works as we kind of pivot out of the COVID. Read this and let's have a conversation. It's a really great conversation starter for communications people and senior staff people to kind of hopefully all get on the same page. Once you get on the same page, then online can really be a great addition and a great ministry. And it's, as Matt and I have determined, online ministry is not going to go away. It's going to continue on. Yeah, it's going to continue on, and we have to embrace it. Every church is going to embrace it differently, but we have to. Now is the time to kind of get together on that strategy and move forward. So
yeah,
hopefully that's helpful for all you comms people out there.
Yeah, and the beauty of the PDF is that you didn't write it. So
exactly,
when your senior pastor says those boneheads, they're not talking about you. So it really is pretty easy. So
yeah,
cool.
I think that'd be a great place to start. And you're right, it is a little less because sometimes that can be a little bit of a difficult, awkward conversation. But if you can just present this to them and just say, hey, this came from some experts. This came from some, some guys who really know what they're talking about. I think that could be a really great way to just open the floor and just maybe to change some perspectives in your staff overall.
It's a discussion starter. Yeah,
it's that, but it's also, it's a, if you're in that role and you're not necessarily allowed to speak into it, you can go and say, hey, look, I read this and I think it makes some good points. And I'm wondering if we can get some clarity on, what is it that we think we want to do strategically with our online? And you can say that without necessarily advocating for, one role over another, which makes it a little bit less risky for you in a staff role. And if if pastors come back and say, hey, we're going to do, this, great. That's all the clarity that you need.
Mm-hmm.
It may resonate with who you are. It may not resonate with who you are. It may cause frustration and aggravation over the next 6 months. And if that's the case, call me.
The clarity is key. The ambiguity is what kills anybody that's really, that's really into communication and strategy. If there's no game plan, if there's no structure or no vision, just a little bit of clarity there can really help you feel like you've got something kind of to move forward on and be measured by. So
yeah. So cool. I know we're like on people's lunch break, so we gotta jump ahead, don't we? We bogged down, so we talk too much. If you notice, we did the 5, the 4. Now we're on 3. So 3 for us. Three key data points that you need to be collecting with your online work. And this, honestly, if this is new for some of your crowd, we might have a bigger struggle, but the big things that we say is, hey, you need to be collecting names, you need to get emails, you need to get cell phones. Okay. Now y'all can go and fight over which order, you want those in. And I'm not gonna be part of that war. But without those 3 key data points, y'all know, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get people engaged. And honestly, it's going to be incredibly difficult to track what you're doing. So we can jump from that one. Because I have a feeling that most of your crowd has a pretty good idea of how to collect all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Our 2 most important engagements, right? First visit, hand raise. Okay. This should be a pretty straightforward, because I think most of this crowd is going to understand just how important it is to get people engaging. But when we talk about first visit with churches, we are, in so many ways, this is just kind of thinking through our in-person assimilation process and trying to figure out how do we make it work on the online. And so it's, how are we going and developing really intentional ways about identifying those first time, those first time visitors on the online product broadcast. How are we, are we using QR codes, text messages, all that kind of thing. The one thing that I keep beating on churches about when we talk with senior pastors and that kind of thing is trying to keep things as simple as possible, right? Abby, you've seen the visitor card that reads more like a credit card application.
Yes.
How many kids do you have? What are all their birthdays? What's your favorite color and when was your dog born? It's like,
right.
We don't need this. It's all we need: cell phone, email, and name, and you are golden. And if we can harvest that, then we can start pushing people towards next steps, right? Which is what that hand raise moment is. The moment that somebody is opting into deeper involvement in your church, and depending on which strategy that you're going to lean into, right, is going to determine what those hand raises look like. And so perhaps, for a building feeder church, that hand raise is somebody saying, you know what, I do want to come to a first timer gathering, and opting to make that. And so we need to be creating those pathways to allow that to happen. Hand raise could also be somebody tithing for the first time. And we need to be thinking through, how do we follow up with that person differently than we do with somebody that's showing up in the pews. And so, this is where it gets a little touchy, because we talk about, how do we identify that stuff, and each church needs to figure that out. You're welcome. But, knowing what those potential hand raise opportunities are, leaning into new classes, showing up in person for the first time, giving, joining a group, each of those types of options are that hand raise to further engagement. And so figuring out, how do we appropriately celebrate it? How do we communicate with the rest of our crowd that this is what's happened? And then what do we encourage them to do next? Those are the things that we need to be really intentional about once we get the information from that first visit about who they are, and those 3 data points. I feel like I just ran through that at lightning speed. Did I miss anything, Todd or Abby? Did I just butcher anything? Are there people fighting in Facebook?
No, I think that was great.
I think you're good.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Last thing for us is, and again, this is where we stay. Every church needs to figure out what this looks like in their context. Okay. But really, it's coming down to what is our one goal for online ministry. Okay. Now, each of those 5 strategies kind of helps us figure out what our church's individual goal is. Where I'm guessing most of our churches are in that building feeder and that campus launcher model. Okay. And so the question really is, which of these strategies are we leaning into? And because we're leaning into that, what is our goal? Is our goal butts and seats, official location Sunday morning? Or is our goal, enabling people to be able to gather wherever and be able to resource them? We identify what that is. That's going to bring about some incredible clarity that allows us to design systems, allows us to design processes, allows us to design our the entirety of our model in a way that, you're able to clearly communicate both up and down, the leadership structure of your church. So I feel like I just blew through all that. What can I clarify, or do you just need me to shut up? That's a valid answer too.
No, I think that was super helpful. And as you mentioned, I think a lot of our watchers on here are familiar with these broad concepts and ideas of, we need to be collecting people's data. But I think you're right. I think a lot of people overcomplicate a lot of things, or they see it done in a certain model and they're like, okay, we're going to replicate exactly this without considering whether or not that's actually super effective for them, for their community, for their demographic and their people. So yeah, I think that's super helpful. And as we are talking about all of this, do you have any maybe like specific action steps that people can take implementing this strategy?
Yeah. So first things first, choose a model, choose a strategy, pick one of those 5 lanes and go, right? I'll have a lot of times churches will say, well, I want to do this one and this one. And it's like, that's great. You're going to fail. That you're welcome for that encouraging word, but it's pick a lane, own a lane, be okay with it, and go. And what that does, and this This allows you to say no to so many things that are going to clog up what you're doing, and it's going to simplify it. So first things first, figure out what your strategy is. Own it, love it, run with it, and then begin to secure buy-in. So in some cases, this may be securing buy-in from elder boards, from senior leadership. This is securing buy-in from key stakeholders and key volunteers and people that can fill those 4 roles, right? Another piece for this is, and we're just out of budget season, no bummer, but is starting to set aside the amount of money that you're going to need to be able to do this well. As you can imagine, you start from that old normal is going to be pretty easy financially to do. The further to the right you go on that list, the more expensive that it gets. Now, I don't put numbers on that because we all know that, shoot, the camera on this thing and is so much more powerful than what we had, 3 years ago, much less 10 years ago in the church. There's a lot of things that you can do if you're scrappy and a little bit creative. It may not, create elevation style, video or product or whatever, but it allows you to start building into that. So we don't, like I said, we don't talk gear lists or money or amounts or anything like that. And then the last thing is really just kind of figure out, how do you fill those 4 roles? How do you fill it? Who do you have on your team? Is this something as a church, you need to fund? Is it something that you can do as volunteer based? Those are really kind of the next steps that as you kind of think through, where do we go now? That's it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's super helpful. Todd, do you have anything to add there? I know that you also mentioned that these roles can be taken over by volunteers or maybe volunteer teams. If you have any, insight to speak into that, we would love to hear that too.
Yeah, no, they can be, as Matt said, you can be very flexible, but all 4 of those types of roles that we discussed, and again, there's more information in the PDF that you can download as well, but all 4 of those roles, according to which model you pick are important, but that doesn't mean that they have to be full-time. It doesn't mean that they have to be paid. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that you have to have 4 people. It can be 2 people or 1 person or 3 people. Every church is different, and according to what your goals are and what you really want to do, that really depends on whether it's staffed, whether it's a paid position or a part-time role. So, but you can't put the cart before the horse, right? You can't try and fill those roles until you kind of choose where you're headed, because that determines even the functionality of each of those roles as well. So you gotta start with, like Matt said, action step 1, which is choosing your model, choosing your direction, choosing your vision, and then you move forward from that.
And this may be unpopular, and this may be really weird for a staffing firm to say, but one of the things that I think we're convinced of coming out of the pandemic is I wonder if our churches don't need to get more intentional about driving ministries volunteer wise. So what do I mean by that? Tony Morgan has talked for years about this 1 to 100 weekend attendance to full-time equivalent on staff type of a number. And I think we need to start moving that way. And so I think our churches have a ton of people that are just dying to be asked to come and serve and do things. And I think we've gotten, in many cases through the years, we've gotten so specific on people's roles that we've forgotten that we have volunteers that would love to do this. And so I think there's, as we look at our churches, we may not have the budget to bring on, 4 people at $75,000 a year plus benefits to fully staff this up. But man, I bet there's 8 or 10 people in your congregation that would absolutely love just to have somebody come tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I know that you're passing communion, one Sunday a month. And you may really like that, but I know that you also do, graphic design or something like that in your day job. Is this something that you'd like to be able to help us with and serve it? And so lots of opportunities for you to be able to do that and not have to go and pay for somebody to come on staff full time. So sorry, I rambled.
No, definitely. I think that's awesome. I think that's super helpful. And everything that you guys have covered, I think has been super insightful. And I think that everyone in the Church Comms group is really going to draw a lot of benefit from it. So going forward, if someone wants to know more about you guys, more about chemistry staffing, or wants to continue to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yep, chemistrystaffing.com. And if you go to chemistrystaffing.com/comms, and it's COMMS for clarity, we've got the download that we've been talking about there for you, and you can also dig up everything you could possibly ever want to know about us.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us today. And like I said, I think this was super helpful, and I learned a lot. And my biggest takeaway is just clarity, clarity, clarity. If I could take away anything from this, be specific. And I think that is a great piece of advice. So thank you both.
Great. Thanks, Abby.
Pretty good. Thank you.
See you guys next time.
Yep. Mm.